Let's talk about Angular. All right, so Angular, as I mentioned earlier, is the equivalent of the library that we've been using so far. We're using React, right, as a library that for rendering dynamic DOM elements, right, and manipulating the DOM element. But Angular is a little more than that, right? React truly is its only role is to provide an abstraction of the DOM, right? That and then gives us a nice set of abstractions that allows us to represent new elements and trigger certain events and whatnot. But it really focuses only on the DOM part, right? On being able to manipulate the DOM, right? It has no opinion on how you talk to the server. It has no opinion on how you represent the data. It doesn't have any opinion on how state is maintained. That's not true. In the new version of React, there is a newer abstraction that handles state, but typically it's not its core functionality. Okay, it really focuses only on the part of manipulating the DOM, right, or giving an abstraction there. Angular is much more than that, right? Not only does it give us an abstraction to manipulate the DOM, but it also has a very strong opinion on how you should talk to the server, on how you represent the data, how you model it, and what the communication is between the users as they generate events and how those events are handled by the client. And it creates abstractions for all these, right? For instance, in React, we had to create our own services, right? And we had to create our own singleton pattern, and Angular actually has an abstraction just for that, for creating a service, right? And it has a very well-defined abstraction for that, right? Several design patterns for best practices on how to do that. Same thing. In React, we had to use Redux, right? Another pattern on how to maintain state, on how is it that those events were mapped to change in the state over time. React actually has an abstraction for that already baked in, right? So the controllers, of creating a controller or components that handle the state changes across over time. That's why a lot of folks consider Angular to have a much steeper learning curve than React, because React doesn't really care about those other things, right? You're free to do whatever you want, right? And oftentimes folks find alternative solutions, right? It says, okay, I'll use React for what it's good, right? Of just manipulating the DOM, having a very nice abstraction of HTML and the DOM, yes? And I'll use other solutions for state manipulation and communication and services and talking to the server. Angular provides a whole solution across DOM manipulation, handling events from the user, representing that data, and then sending those state changes over to the server. So that's why I chose Angular to be introduced later. Right? I think we've already understood what a component is. That there is an abstraction of the DOM. Right? We kind of have that already in our heads. We already understand that there's a layer on top of a lower level of HTML, right? That is being abstracted by this library. So Angular kind of starts where React ends, right? And now just keeps adding to that layer of abstraction, right? If we would have started with Angular, I think it would have been much harder, right? Because not only do we have the DOM abstraction, but now you have also the controllers, you have the services, you have all this other stuff that you need to worry about, right? So I think it would have been harder to start with Angular. I think it was much easier to start with React. Okay. All right. So let's get started. Just like React, there are several tools that we need to install to get started. In React, we have the Create React app. Yes. In Angular, we have something similar. We'll need to install the Angular command line interface, right? The Angular command line interface, right? And you can install that with just plain old npm. npm assumes that you already have Node installed in your machine, which you do. You did that early on, yes? So you'll have to install the Angular command line interface. So npm install -g. -g means global, meaning I want this CLI available globally. I should be able to run the CLI, the command line interface, from anywhere. Once you do that, right, you'll have a new command at your at the command line, ng for Angular, and this CLI will allow us to create new applications, start existing applications, debug, do all sorts of package, build, do all sorts of lifecycle commands on applications in general. Yes? Okay. All right. So to create a brand new application, you do ng, and then new. Right. That's a parameter, and then the name of the application. Right. So let's do that. Let's go to a terminal. Where are we here? Summer 2, and let's go into lectures. And we can create a brand new Angular application. We say ng new hello app, hello world app. All right, so that is going to copy down a boilerplate start template for us to play around with. Okay, it'll take a bit. And once it downloads it, once it installs it, you can go into the application. You're going to go into that application and then start the application, and you call it ng-serve -- open, right? Or you can just say ng-serve, or you can also do npm start, just like we did npm start with the React application. You can also do an npm start here, or you can use the command line interface ng-serve. ng-serve actually calls npm start. Okay, so it's a yes. Yeah, just use the latest one. Yeah, use the latest one. Yep. All right, so I think it's done. We can go into the hello world, and we can do an ng-serve. Now, if you just do ng-serve, it'll start the server, it'll start the application, and you'll have to remember that you'll need to go and navigate to the point, your browser, to where the application is running. Right? It's not like in React that npm start opened up the browser already, pointing to localhost 3000. Yes? To do that here, you have to add the -- open. Right? Then it will open up the browser pointing to the right place. Right, so ng-serve -- open starts the application, compiles it, transpiles it, and then opens up your browser pointing to the default application. Instead of 3000, like in React, here the port is 4200. Okay? All right. So there it is. There's our brand new boilerplate starting place for our application. Everybody okay? All right. All right. So let's open up the application. We can open up with our favorite IDE. So let's close the project. We'll say, okay, so let's open up the application we just created with Angular. Let's see. I believe it's under webdev. Under here, lectures. There it is, our Hello World app. All right, so let's take a look at this. The content. Right? So all our source code is going to be under SRC. Right, very much like a React application, right? And under here, there's a couple things that we're going to use here. In particular, we're going to have most of our application. We're going to spend most of our time under the app directory. Okay, this app directory, as the name suggests, this is the application. This is the application, and the entry point to this application is this right here, the app.module.ts. That's the entry point of the application. Right? Now, what this does is that it just does a lot of just configuration. Right? It bootstraps the application, and it loads everything, and then it kicks off the index page. Okay? In this particular case, one of the things that it's doing is that it's loading what is called the browser module. Right? Before there was just one module when this was just Angular, the old version of Angular. Since then, in newer versions of Angular, they wanted to be able to distinguish between modules that were targeting only browser, the DOM, right, HTML, and they wanted to distinguish something that was native, right? Very much like React. React wanted to be able to do this, right? So in React, you have React, and then you have React DOM. And React DOM is a library that specifically targets browsers. Yes, just like React Native specifically targets other devices. So the same thing here. They wanted to be able to distinguish between the two, right? Either this is specifically targeting browser-specific code, right? So so meaning I'm loading all the DOM manipulation code that I need to talk to the things underneath, right? Another thing here is that it's loading what's the app.component. This is the root tag element, right? That starts off everything, right? Unlike React, in React you would have to create your own app tag, right, or your own hello world tag, and then render that tag to be injected into the HTML. Here they give you one to start off with, right? They give you one, and they called it app component, right? And there it is. There's app component right here, right? App component. And the only thing that it does, it declares a brand new tag called app root, right? Tag app root that gets rendered right here in this HTML. Right? This is the content of that HTML. So it's the same thing as if you would have a component, and then in that component you would have a render return this HTML. Yes, it's the equivalent of that. Now you'll notice that unlike React, right? React likes to mix and match HTML with JavaScript, right? And go back and forth between HTML, right? DOM, and then JavaScript, and then DOM, and then JavaScript. Yes, right? And we mix and match. Angular has a different approach. Angular distinguishes and says, no, we're gonna break these into two distinct camps, right? It says we're gonna have the JavaScript on one side, and we're gonna have the HTML on the other side, right? And they don't mix. They do not mix, right? They have very distinct roles, right? The DOM part, the HTML part, should only be concerned with rendering, right? And looking pretty and loading the style sheet and laying out the page. It should not be at all concerned with calculating content, right? That should be the responsibility of JavaScript. So on the JavaScript side, it's all about objects and data and looping and branching and if statements and whatnot. Yes? Okay? And these two distinct worlds do not mix and match. Okay? Makes sense? All right? Unlike React. React, they encourage you. Right? They even have a library, JSX, that allows you to embed HTML right inside of JavaScript. Yes? All right? Angular takes a different approach and says, no, these are two distinct worlds. They have two distinct concerns. Right? They're applying a best practice that we divide the concerns. Right? The divide the concerns, they do not mix. We don't mix the different concerns. Right? When you're thinking about objects, you should be in JavaScript. When you were thinking about layout and rendering and whatnot, you should be in the HTML. Yes? Well, it used to be that we would always encourage breaking it into two. Right? React kind of broke that by inventing JSX. Right? When they add, the problem with mixing was that if you are in any particular language and you want to generate another language, right? For instance, from JavaScript you want to generate HTML, right? You ended up with lots of concatenations and templating And that was very error prone typically, right? Because it was very hard to identify a mistake in your HTML if you had this additional quotation marks and plus signs and dollar signs everywhere, right? And so folks tried, typically they would discourage you of generating any language from another language, right? In this case would be generating HTML from JavaScript. It was very strongly discouraged. With the invention of transpilers and Babel and JSX and whatnot, the line is blurring, right? Where you can have intermixed languages, okay, and you can have these transpilers converted into proper and apply best practices right inside. So I would still make an effort to even React, right? That where your components are specifically have an HTML part of it, and then you have an implementation of the functions elsewhere, right? As opposed to we have a lot of maps in there. I would then instead call a function that would calculate that outside, and then we would be embedded inside of the escape characters. Okay. Yeah. But Angular does an explicit division between the two. Okay. So anyway, so we have this entry point of the component. We have the entry point of the component, and right now, and the component says, and here's how the two worlds are related to one another, right? This is our entry point, the component. This is the entry point component. Inside of the class, you're going to put all your JavaScript. Yes? Inside of this class, you will put all your JavaScript, and that JavaScript is going to be related to the HTML through this annotation. We're going to say that this is a component and that the HTML is referenced from here. The HTML that goes along with this component, with this JavaScript, it's that HTML. You see that? Okay, which happens to be that HTML right here. All right, this HTML. All right? And we can blow it away. Let's blow it away and say, hello, hello world. All right, this will transpile, right? And our application just says hello world. Everybody okay? That's our entry point. That's our entry point. So any changes I make here are immediately transpiled and redeployed. Everybody okay? Everybody good? Okay, excellent. So how do these two talk to one another? Because we have the component. Right? How do we send data across if they're in two different distinct worlds? Notice here that the component here is declaring a variable, a component variable, in this case called title. See that? Right? So this at component, right, is declaring the connection between the two. So any variable that is declared inside of the component is now actually available in the HTML. So that title, I can escape it and refer to it here in the HTML. So any data, any variable that is declared in the component is also in the context of the HTML. Right? And the way we refer to it is by escape characters. In this case, curly brackets. If I just say title, right, it'll just be title. Right? It's just. But if I put it in braces, then it's the actual value that is declared in the component, right? So if I say this is the title, right, and in here I put it under H2, then it would be injected inside of that component. Make sense? So they talk to one another, and we'll take a look at that next.